What is the evolutionary explanation for what is called ADHD? I have a daughter with a diagnosis, and after reading up on the matter, the second D in ADHD seems like a reach from an evolutionary perspective. That is to say, disorder, right? I'd love an evolutionary viewpoint on the matter from a professional. Yeah. We have talked about it. We've talked about a number of these so-called disorders that are medicalized, that are treated with for-profit pharmaceuticals, and that are likely both at the end or near the end of some naturally occurring continuum, which had some reason to exist in a time before hypernovelty was so pervasive. And also there are likely to be, for this as with some of these other things, reasons for an increasing prevalence now.
Yeah. My guess would be that there is a pathology, and that Pharma has, recognizing its interests in selling more drugs, basically taken a pathology that is real and narrow and may or may not be successfully treated with a drug over which they have intellectual property rights, but that one could plausibly increase the number of people who have it by correcting the definition in a particular way. And so my guess would be most people who have ADHD are really suffering the failure of the system to deliver a suitably enriching environment of the sort any ancestor until very recently would have had. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, you've got a system that's broken in terms of it providing something meaningful and rewarding for a child to do that it would want to do. And in the absence of that, you see a pathological manifestation, but it's really the environment failing, not the kid. That said, there could be individuals for whom that's not true. And this, very often it'll be, if you take any sufficiently powerful drug with cognitive impacts, it will disrupt a system. So if you've got somebody who's more active than they should be, and you dump some drug that's different, it will put them into, hey, that's different mode. And so you can then run an experiment and say, does this particular compound have a positive effect on hyperactivity? Well, it changed that child's behavior. And the point is, well, did that change last, or did they just simply accommodate the drug and then go back to being the way they were? Anyway, something along those lines.
Well, and I guess I object, and we read about this in the book as well. I object to the idea of should be. And I know that you use that term within the context as it is used by modern medicine and pharmaceutical industry. But the idea that children should be able to sit still, facing forward, and not move except when called upon, or when they've raised their.
That's weird. That's
very weird. Isaac, you want to put us both back on screen? Okay. Now you guys know more about the way our cameras are set up.
Yes, you do.
So the idea that the school situation, which is generally the realm in which it comes to the attention of parents, that the teachers just cannot navigate this with this child who will not sit still, is anything like an environment which children have had exposure to before, or really is something that children should be expected to endure, is itself, I'd say, erroneous. So we also see, it's interesting, the person who wrote the question, I think, said it was her daughter. I'm imagining her, but it was a daughter who's been diagnosed with this. And this is a pretty sex stereotyped diagnosis. In general, the girls get diagnosed with anxiety and neuroses and get the drugs for that. And the boys get diagnosed with the ADHD and get the drugs for that, which is to say mostly speed. And, boys are more likely to be fidgeting, and they're more likely to need to be learning through actually, bodily interface with the world, as opposed to taking things in entirely in the abstract. And that doesn't mean that is not the same thing as saying, therefore, all boys need to be medicated. Unless what your goal is we are going to create an environment, and it's going to maximize it's going to make the largest student to teacher ratio possible with as few not particularly well trained teachers as possible. Not to say that there aren't some amazing teachers out there, but we want to be able to have maximize profits and minimize the confusion in the classroom. Well, we're going to do that by making all the children be most likely to be compliant, complacent, and quiet. And that is more likely to be more like a girl style of being than a boy style of being. And so if that's your goal, then the environment in which you're trying to get those kids to behave, you've automatically basically made at least half of the population of your classrooms non-compliant and therefore at risk of being drugged into compliance.
Yeah, I of course agree with all of that, but I have some desire to defend myself against a possible interpretation. When I say should, that is a very careful theoretician self-defined should. In other words, I'm not imbuing the powers that structure these environments with any right to say whether the child is too active. But what I'm saying is that there's some physiologically right level of activity, and that a person might indeed have a disorder that would cause them to be outside of whatever the optimal activity level was. And, by analogy,
they might have restless nose syndrome, for instance.
I have had that one myself. But by analogy, if I say, when a person's temperature is too high, right? This is obviously a reductio ad absurdum, but a person could say, well, who are you to say what's too high? And the answer is, well, I'm not saying it's 98.6 is the right temperature, but I'm saying that a temperature can be so high that you can't function. That's too high. And so it is possible that there are kids whose activity level, through whatever process modulates this, are really too active for their own good.
I think that's likely true. And I think it is, as with all of these things, a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the people who are actually being medicated into submission.
I agree. That's why I started
just like you and I will say, trans is real and extraordinarily rare. Anxiety, crippling anxiety is real and on the rise because of what's going on. But much more rare than the number of people on the anti-anxiety drugs would suggest. And the same thing with the idea of hyperactivity. How about stop taking recess away and stop letting kids be safe by parking them in front of screens and actually enforce them going outside and running around and getting dirty and getting themselves into little scrapes and scuffs, and then see how hyperactive they are for the however many hours a day you expect them to sit still and listen to someone drone on about gender ideology or whatever the hell is going on in schools.
Yeah, I agree. That's why the game of pharma is always, you own a molecule, you're looking for a plausible reason to deploy it, and then you're looking for the broadest definition over which it can be deployed, right? It's a game. It has nothing to do with making people better off. Doesn't mean that these things don't often start with an actual pathology. And then the question is, well, what molecule's in the neighborhood and how broad can we make the definition?